Hello, I'm Chris Metherell and I'm here to tell you about a notation system specifically designed for the notation of clog and step dances. And this arose in the early 1980s, in 1981, when a group of clog dancers, including myself, realised that we needed a relatively simple but accurate system to notate the clog dances which we were then collecting. And so over a period of some weeks we developed a system. We trialled it on a couple of traditional clog dancers who allowed us to use them as guinea pigs, and the system has basically stayed the same ever since those days in 1981. We still use the same system to record the dances we collect. The system was updated slightly in 1995 by Ian Craigs and myself, not to change it, but just to simplify some areas and make it a little bit more obvious what we were writing down. But we haven't changed the system, as I say, since 1981 effectively. And the system's published. The original book, published in 1981, which was typed up on an old-fashioned typewriter. Didn't have word processors in those days, and a much more modern production which was produced in 1995, and it's now available, as you will see from the original screens, on the web as an electronic copy which you can use online or you can download. You will need one of these as I go through the system, or you'll need the electronic copy, because I shall be referring to the sections as I go through. If you have any questions, we have somebody monitoring the chat line, so if you add your questions to the chat line, I'll attempt to answer them at the end if there are things that you are not grasping or you want a bit more explanation. I'm aiming that this should take about an hour, so with a little bit of time at the end for questions. Now, the Newcastle Notation system is designed on three important principles, and I guess, like anything, it's important to understand the principles before one actually gets into the nitty-gritty of how the system works. And the core of the system, say, is contained in three pieces of information. The first is that the system is positional. What it does, because of the way that clog and step dancing work, it records the positions of the feet at various times during the course of a clog or step. So as I move my feet about, the system records the positions that those feet are in, and it records normally the positions where the foot makes a beat on the ground. I'm wearing shoes today because if I wore clogs it would not be very nice for the sound system, but of course originally it was designed for clog dances. So the system is positional. It's also a natural system. It assumes that we all have a natural stance, we all have a natural way of moving. That varies a bit from person to person, but basically, if I move my leg out, it hangs in a very natural way. I'm not forcing my foot pointed, I'm not doing something strange, I'm not doing this. My leg is in a relatively relaxed state. And the whole system is predicated upon that as its second important factor, that it's a natural system and we're recording, where we need to, deviations from that natural way that we move. And the third thing, and perhaps the most important, is what we developed as the economy of movement rule. And what that does is to assume that the method by which we get from one position to another is the shortest and most sensible way. So if my foot is making a beat back here and it's going to make a beat at the front, the system assumes that I'm just going to do that. That's my natural way of getting from this position at the back to this position at the front. If I want my foot to do something different, if I want it to do that, I can write it down, I can record it using the system, but the assumption is that it will be the simplest and most natural way to perform it. And that's crucial, because obviously when one is dancing, you need to know how to get from place to place. The way that Newcastle Notation works on the page is that there are a number of columns, and The first column on the left-hand side of the page, as you look at it, contains the musical count, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. Now, in a lot of ways, this is the most difficult part of the notation, because getting that musical count in your head when you're recording a step or when you're dancing a step can be quite difficult. But there is a principle underlying this, and that is that in music there are strong beats in every bar. If I'm in hornpipe time, which is in 4/4 time, there are 4 strong beats in the bar. If I'm in waltz time, there are 3 strong beats in each bar. And in simple terms, if I want to split those strong beats into 3s, little triplets, I verbalise it as one-ander, and the 1 is the first beat, the and is an ampersand, a sign for and an A, small A, and I read that as one-ander. So if I'm splitting into 3s, it doesn't matter what time signature I'm in, if I'm splitting strong beats into 3s, I'm going to write that as 1 ampersand a. If I'm splitting them into 4s, so I'm splitting each strong beat into 4, I'm writing 1 an and a, and I write that down as 1 strong beat, an, A-N, and the word, and an E. And this means that for any point in the step, I know precisely where the beat comes, because those words I'm using in the beat column are unique. So if it's a triplet, it's distinguishable from a beat which is split into 4. And that is crucial, of course, when you're dancing. You need to know exactly where the beat is coming. And that, in fact, was one of the main drivers for us writing this system, because although there was some uniformity within the clog dance world about how to write the movements down, there was absolutely no uniformity as to how to write the musical rhythm, and that was, of course, absolutely crucial. As we move across the page, the second and third columns we call the movement columns, and that describes where my feet are, what movement they're performing. So, for example, you'll all know what a shuffle is. That's a word in the movement column, or step, or heel step, toe, heel. Those are all examples of movements of my feet. And you'll see that there are 2 movement columns. The left-hand one is for the left foot, and the right-hand one is for the right foot. So we'd write toe, heel in the left-hand column, it's my left foot doing it, or toe, heel in the right-hand column with my right foot. Now, there are a large number of words for the which we can use. I'm going to come back to those in a moment, but first I want to look at the right-hand column, which we call if you like, the positional column. And this is the one that causes people the maximum amount of stress, because most people have some sort of feeling about what a step is or a shuffle, but the right-hand column, the modifier column, contains lots of A's and B's and C's and angles and colons, and is, I suppose, perhaps the most difficult, not to necessarily write, but to understand. And because the system is positional, what that right-hand column is doing is to show me exactly where, on a map of the floor, my feet are moving. And you'll see it's divided down the centre with colons. And that, everything to the left of the colon, it relates to my left foot, or the movement I've written for my left foot, and everything to the right of the colon relates to the movement I've written for my right foot. Now, what about this map? Well, it's a little bit difficult to understand until you see somebody actually doing it. So I'm going to stand on my lovely board here, and you will see that on the board is marked a cross. And that means that I've divided the dancing space into 4 quadrants. And there are two sets of quadrants overlapping. They are in exactly the same place. One which is for my right foot and one which is for my left foot. I'm going to talk about the right foot for the moment. And the natural position to perform any movement is going to be here. That's the easiest place for me to dance. So that is the unnamed quadrant, if you will. It's the normal place where I'm expecting to step or shuffle or toe heel or whatever, somewhere out there. But sometimes I will want my right foot to perform a movement which crosses over into this side, and that is called the crossed quadrant, X in the modifier column. So if I step in X something, my right foot has moved across. So that's the unnamed quadrant, the crossed quadrant, and then the rear quadrant if I want to step back. And it doesn't take a great deal of imagination to grasp that the fourth one is the rear crossed quadrant. And that's a rather strange position. I often dance there, but nonetheless there are step movements which occur in that position. And as I said, that is mirrored with my other foot. You will see that, if I just move my feet a little bit apart, that the centre of the cross, the origin, if you like, of the quadrants, lies between my insteps and between my feet when I'm standing fairly normally. Remember, it's a natural system. Some people will stand with their feet much closer together than others. Well, that's the way they dance, and so that's the way you record it in the system. And you'll see that my feet are running across that centre line. So the point of where the lines intersect, the quadrant intersects, is roughly where my centre of gravity is when I'm standing normally. It's an important fact to pick up, because later on we should be using that concept of centre of gravity to describe some of the ways that the steps move about. So I've explained that that's I'm talking about my right foot now, unnamed quadrant, crossed, rear cross. And I've got the same thing for my left foot. For my left foot, that's the unnamed quadrant, that's the cross quadrant, that's the rear quadrant, and that's the rear cross quadrant. So if you like, I've got two maps superimposed on each other, one for the left foot and one for the right foot. But you will remember that if you look at the modifier column, there's a set of colons going down the centre of the column, and so everything which is on the left-hand side of that colon relates to my left foot, and everything to the right of the colon relates to my right foot. It's possibly one of the most confusing parts of the system, because there are these two maps superimposed on each other, and you have to know whether it's the left foot or the right foot which is being talked about. So if you go to paragraph 6.3 of your notation books, you will see how this map is further divided up. And because it's a natural system, the map depends upon the size of my feet. If I've got size 12s, the boxes which you see on paragraph 6.3 are bigger. If I've got tissue little size 5s, the boxes are much smaller, because my feet fit inside the box. So the A box, and I'm now standing with my right foot in A, is the size of my foot. And you will see that marked in heavy lines on the paragraph 6.3 that you've got the quadrants there, and the main lines are going to the left of my right foot and underneath my instep. If I want to move my right foot into B, it moves half a foot length forward. So my foot is now in B, and you can see my heel is not quite touching the quadrant line across the base. If I want to move my foot into C, I move it another half. So I've got A, is my right foot in A, my right foot in B, my right foot in C. And those boxes, I remind you, are the size of my feet. if I want to put my right foot way out, it's in D. Now I could step in that. That's stepping right out of the front of the map to step into D. Doesn't happen very often. You have to take pretty big steps to get into D. If I now put my foot in B, so this is in position C, you'll see that to the right of that is a rather large box, quarter of a circle, and that's box E. And behind it is box F, which is 2 foot widths. So A is 1 foot width, F is roughly 2 foot widths. It's not critical. The further away you get from the supporting foot, you will see the bigger the boxes are. And that's absolutely intentional, because there's quite a lot of difference for a dancer whether they're shuffling in B or shuffling in C. But once I get out here, whether I'm in E or crossing into the next box out, which is H, it's a bit more flexible, it's a bit more variable, and it's probably going to vary quite a bit during the course of a dance. So we have designed the system so that you get the maximum accuracy when your feet are close together. And as you move out from that centre, the accuracy decreases, and that is intentional. And wide out you have G, and I say wide out on the diagonal you've got H. So I'll just recap, because it's quite an important part of the system. I'm talking about my right foot now, and my right foot is in A or B or C or D. And now let's look at the left foot, because remember there are 2 superimposed maps, and if you go over the page to paragraph 6.4, you will see that we've put there the complete maps for all the possible positions. If you look at the left foot map, which is the second one, I've got A, B, C, and D. Now, if you look at those, you will see that I've mentioned the 4 quadrants. The nameless quadrant, if I put my foot across the line, it's now in a cross position, and you will see that that right foot is now in crossed C position. Or I could put it in cross E position, which is out there. Or maybe I could put it in say rear C position, which would be there. Or I might go to rear H, right out here. And I could go RXC, I could go to rear cross C, which is there. I don't know whether you can see that on the camera very well, but you can. Or even I could go to rear XH, that would be a very exciting position to be in. And I hope that the paragraph 6.4 makes it quite clear that there are these 2 superimposed maps. I can't say that more enough, really. That's one of the things that causes the maximum confusion. One for the right foot and one for the left foot. Now, if we move on to paragraph 6.5, you will see that up till now my feet have been in a natural position. That's what the system is predicated on. And what we're recording are deviations from that natural space, that natural shape. So one of the things, of course, which most people do, is that they have their feet just very slightly turned out when they're standing in a straight place. Normally just slight out turn, not everybody, but most. Now if I want to have extra out turn, I have to write it down. And so for the right foot, I put an accent moving from the centre of the letter to the right hand side, an acute accent if you will, if you don't know any French, and that shows me that my foot is turned out more than normal. It doesn't tell me how much. It might be more, it might be a bit less, but it tells me the foot is turned out. So if I step with my right foot in position C turned out, it will be that. If I step with my left foot in C turned out, the accent is going to go in the opposite direction. French term, it's going to be a grave accent, C turned out. And that provides, if you will, a little mirror picture of what the feet are doing. If you imagine those accents are pictures of your feet. So if I want both my feet to be turned out and I'm just standing in AA, there we are. I've got both my feet turned out and there's a little picture of AA, and if you look at paragraph 6.6 over the page on my version, you will see at 6.6.1 there is an example. That is a picture of my feet, and you will see that the underneath is written first position, which is about, not quite ballet first position, in fact it's nowhere near ballet first position, Scottish dance first position, A, and a little picture of the accents. And if you turn over the page, you will see if I move sideways to second position, that would be A with my left foot with a grave accent, and F with an acute accent for my right foot. But don't forget that my centre of gravity has got to stay underneath where I am, for reasons that we'll come to later. And you will see other examples there of positions written. This is, say, on paragraph 6.6.1. And unusually, but occasionally, you will find that people want to turn their foot inwards. So if I have a false first position with my feet turned in, once again, the little pictures on top of the letters denote that shape. So my right foot is turned in and so is my left foot. And if you think about it for a moment, if I'm recording a shuffle, which we'll come to in a moment, very often it will start with the foot turned out for the first beat, and it will be, it might be turned in for the second beat. It's a really turny shuffle. There is a final example of this, and that is if my feet are straighter than usual. And that, again, it does occur. Here I am in my normal, just slightly turned out foot position. I can straighten them up slightly. It looks a bit pigeon-toed when you see it, because it's not the normal way that people stand. But my feet now are dead straight, and I write that by putting a straight line over the top of the letter in the modifier column. So then I've got this means of not only writing the positions that the feet are in, but denoting the amount of outturn or inturn that the feet are. And although it's not perfect, we assume that those boxes squeeze out a little bit in order to accommodate that. So although the A box is the size of my feet, if I do this, you can see that my foot won't actually fit quite in the A box, my right foot. Well, we just have to squeeze that box out a bit to assume that that foot will fit in. Otherwise we'd have a very, very complicated and complex procedure. I'm not going to deal at the moment with aerial positions, but there are, in addition to positions on the floor, we also have a way of writing with your feet are in the air, doing clever things. But I'm going to pass over that for the moment because that's just a little bit more complicated. If you look at paragraph 7.1, we're going to talk about the movement columns now. We've talked about the map, we've talked about the timing, to talk about the actual core of the system, which is the movements, and that's at paragraph 7. And once again, for some special purposes, we've divided the foot up and produced a little foot map, and that is at 7.1.1. Because it's a natural system, we assume that all the beats which a foot makes, and remember we're talking about writing where beats on the floor, which would make a sound. If they were done in a soft shoe, they won't make a sound, but they would normally make a sound. That's what I'm recording. And normally we assume that that's done with the ball of the foot, because that's natural. If I'm standing with my heels off the ground, that's my normal sort of dancing position that most dancers adopt, and I'm on the ball of my feet. If I want to stand on real tippy toes, difficult to do, but I can do it with a pair of clogs, then I would write that as the toe of the clog. Or if I want to bang the tip of my clog on the ground, you can see from the map that's tip. But we assume, and yes, we write it otherwise, that we're dancing on the balls of our feet. And that's our normal position. You'll see there's a complicated map there, with talking about the sides of the feet and all sorts of other things. Don't worry too much about that, because we're not going to deal with clicking one foot against the other very much. Again, that's extra complication. The key to any sort of system, whether you're learning to read music or read a book, if you're learning to read at primary school, you don't start off by reading Wordsworth. You start off by reading Fireman Sam, or even something less than Fireman Sam. So I'm not dealing with the Fireman Sam version of Newcastle Notation, but I'm certainly not taking you to William Makepeace Thackeray, let alone Shakespeare. So you can look at the map, but remember, the key point is that it's a natural system, and the natural position is to dance on the balls of your feet and move the balls of your feet around. That's particularly the case, of course, when you're in clogs, because automatically you have a slight upturn in the clogs, and you're going to dance, say, with that weight slightly forward. Now, we've split the book, the movements up in the book, into categories, and the first category are those that always have some weight attached to them. So this is a new concept, transferring the weight when I'm moving around. If I want to step on my right foot, and that we write that surprisingly as step, I write that as step. I would write in the position column where the step is, and my weight now transfers to that, and you will see that it's underlined. And anything which is underlined means that you take the weight on that foot or feet. So if I'm going to step forwards, as though I was walking forwards, I'm on the balls of my feet, I'm going to step forwards into C, and I've now got the weight on that foot. The centre of gravity has moved onto that foot in C. I'm still on the balls of my feet though. So if I want to go, I'm going to step forward, step back, step forward, step back. I'm going step in C, step in A, step in C, step in A. Now normally I'm going to have to swap feet in order to do that. So now that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to alternate my feet, step in C, step on the left foot in A, step in A, step in A, step on the right foot in C. Okay, and remember that the two maps are overlapping, so that the movements of my right foot the map is mirrored onto the left hand side. I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to be standing just on the balls of my feet. I'm going to step forwards into C, step forwards into C, step in A, because the map hasn't moved, remember, the map is glued to the floor. Step in A, step in A, step in C, step in A, step in A. And what I'm doing is I'm moving around on that map. Let me give you another example. Here I am, I'm standing on my ball of my left foot, step in E, step in E, step in E, step in E, step in A, step in A. Couldn't see where I was going. So all I'm doing is I'm moving my feet into that map. Step in A, step in XC, step in A, step in A, step in XC, step in A, step in A. Sorry, I haven't got my feet quite enough far back, but you get the concept that those steps are moving about the map, and because they're underlined, I'm taking a weight, and that means that my weight is shifting to over that foot. Important concept. Now, one of the things that we discovered that was difficult about writing steps down, or obviously it proved difficult for people, was that they used the word hop in two different ways. We've chosen to use the word hop to mean a spring off a foot and landing on the same foot. Hop, or hop right, hop. So this is hop in A, and so is this actually, hop in A, because of course it's the other side of the map. Some people used to use it for springing from side to side. That was very confusing. Don't go there. A hop is a little spring made on the, normally the ball of the foot, it's a natural system, and landing back on the same supporting foot, hop in A. Or if I was standing out here, that's hop in E. Okay, and the third movement which always takes weight is the spring. What's the difference between a step and a spring? Well, if I step on my right foot, I'm going to step into E, step. There is a moment when both my feet are on the ground and then I move the weight forwards. I step back in A, there's a moment when both my feet are on the ground and then my weight comes back, just as though you're walking along the road. If you're springing or skipping along the road, there would be a moment when both your feet are off the ground. Here I go. I'm springing from foot to foot. There is a fraction which obviously I can't hold. I can't still frame my feet. There's a moment when both my feet are off the ground, and that is the only difference between a step and a spring. We don't notate the height of the spring in the same way as we don't notate the height of the hop. It's you do it as naturally as you can. So we have those three weight-bearing movements: step, step, or hop, or spring. And there are only three. We've discovered every weight-bearing part of the step can be divided into one of those three movements. And you'll see that there's a list of them there. There are some extra bits and pieces, shunts and so forth, which again I'm going to leave, but there is one I want to cover, and that is the word jump. And if a spring lands on one foot, a jump lands on 2 feet. It's really just a shorthand to save having to write spring in both the columns. So if I jump onto both my feet in C, or jump back into A, jump equal is the way I write it. I could write spring equal in both columns, but it's just shorthand, and that's covered at 735. And that's one of the things that we did in 1985. This wasn't actually done in 1985, but one of the things that we did then was to just tidy up some of the really difficult bits to write down where it was, it was just a bit complicated, or an easier way of explaining it. And so we modified it. We didn't change anything. The notations which were written in 1985 are just the same. You can read them just the same. One or two of them might be just slightly more difficult to read because we simplify one or two things. And then if we go to 7.4, you will see there are a number of movements which sometimes transfer weight. And the first one is drop. And that implies that I'm standing on my foot with the weight on the ball, with the weight on some part of the foot, and then some other part of the foot hits the ground. I'm doing a heel drop. And you'll see that that word heel comes in front of the word drop. And those parts of the foot that I've already mentioned, toe, tip, so forth, always come in front of the main movement. So this is a drop, and I would underline that because I'm taking the weight on my flat foot eventually. I can do the same thing. It's rather difficult to do, but I'm going to try and poison it. I can do the same thing with the ball of my foot. Ball drop. Yeah. But of course, I don't have to take the weight. I can stand on my left foot and go heel drop. No weight. I've got the weight all on my left foot. I've stepped left, I've left that foot on the ground, and I've dropped my heel. And the system expects that. If I'm going to drop my heel on my right foot, obviously I've got to have my toe on the ground. So the system, because it's natural, assumes that. You have to read through, and you'll see, well, I step on my left. Well, if the next movement is heel drop right, with no weight, I've got to have left my right toe on the ground to do that heel drop. But it's not underlined, because there's no weight bearing. And then there are two other important movements that don't have weight transfer. I mentioned one which sometimes has weight transfer, but there are several which have no weight transfer at all. And the two most important are the tap, where I'm going to beat my foot on the ground and take it off again. So here I am doing a tap in E, my right foot, or I'm doing a tap in C, my right foot. Remember, it's natural movement, so I'm not going, putting my foot right up in the air. I'm doing it as naturally as I can. If I want to put my foot right up in the air, I would have to write that. And I'd say we haven't dealt with aerial positions. I'm not going to do that today. So the tap is a beat made with in this case, the ball of the foot, it's implied, with the foot rising off the ground again. Or, the other word which doesn't bear weight is touch. And that is where I'm putting my foot on the ground, but I'm not taking any weight. There's no weight on my right foot in E. I'm just simply touching it there. So here's an example of me standing on my flat foot. So that's, I've flat stepped on my left. I'm touching in C, I'm touching in E, I'm touching in A. So in each of the modifier columns, you will write those positions alongside the touches. So it's flat step left, touch A, touch C, touch E, touch A. So you've got there two movements which do not take any weight, and you will see they are never underlined because there is no weight taken. And it's quite a useful addition to the system, really. We devised, we haven't seen anybody else do in the way they write steps out in the past, is that because of that underlining, you can trace the movement of the weight around the step. The weight moves with the underlining, and we found that very useful, particularly if you are going to say try and translate the Newcastle notation into another notation system, perhaps Laban notation. Having that weight bearing going down the step is actually really very useful. There is one important thing I haven't mentioned, and it's worth mentioning now because I've spoken about Laban notation. If you're familiar with Laban notation, you will know that it works from the bottom of the page upwards. You start at the bottom and you work up, because that's the way you walk along the street. You start from here and you end up over there. Newcastle notation, because it's a clog step notation, and because most people we found did this back in the 1980s or 1970s, you read down the page. You start from the top and you read down. There's no particular reason from that other than that's what people seem to prefer back in the 1980s when we wrote the system. Okay, now I want to deal with a couple of movements which can cause a bit of trouble. And in order to do this, I'm going to come back and speak about aerial positions, which I mentioned earlier on and said we weren't going to cover them in detail, but I want to just speak about them very briefly for this particular movement. And it's a catch out. Now, because this is a natural system, we assume if you take your foot off the ground, you don't take it very far. Well, I suppose my foot's maybe a couple of inches off the ground, something like that. I'm standing on the flat on the left, and my right foot has come up a couple of inches off the ground. And I write that, if I need to, by saying that my right foot is in A with one arrow next to it. So it's a fairly low aerial position. If I wanted to be really high, like this D position I showed you earlier on, I want it to be up there, I'd write 3 arrows. Very unusual. I mean, foot up like that somehow. But the normal aerial position very often is either 1 or perhaps two arrows. And if you want to look that up, the aerial positions are dealt with earlier on in the book at paragraph 6-7. And roughly speaking, if a foot's a few inches above the ground, your low aerial, middle aerial and high aerial. 1 arrow, 2 arrows, 3 arrows. But remember, it's a natural system. So some people's natural positions, if you're really tall, are going to be higher than if you're really short. Now, a catch is really a special version of a tap. And it's a tap where the starting and finishing positions turn out to be rather important. So if they're not important, I could just write tap and that's fine, tap in E. But supposing that I want to, in fact, to start that tap with my foot just above the ground in A position. I'm talking about my right foot. And then I want to tap it in E, and then I want to bring it back. Sorry, then I want to swing it out further. So I'm in a little aerial position, I'm tapping in E, and then I'm extending my foot. Sort of thing I might do if I'm doing this sort of dance. So I would write that as catch out. A catch out is a tap which starts with the foot either behind or close to the supporting foot, makes a beat, a tap, and ends up with the foot further away. Okay, and very often that means that I'm going to start in a rear position. So a really typical example would be I start with my right foot in R, C, I make the tap in A as my foot comes past my left foot, which is doing the supporting, and my foot ends up in C or CD. So that would be, I'll do it again, and that's a catch out starting in C aerial, quite low, with the tap in A and finishing in, again, C low aerial. And you'll recognise that as it's a very common movement where I go, and I put a hop in at the end of it, but that's a catch out. And it's just a tap with some special bits added to make it easier to write down. And unsurprisingly, there's a reverse. I can do catch in. So if I start with my foot in C low aerial, I catch it perhaps, let's say in this case in B, and then I end up with my foot in RB, which is back here. So I'm going, you can see that the tap is roughly here. I'm starting in C, the tapping as I come in and coming back to the rear position. Now, one of the things I should have said right at the beginning is that reading Newcastle Notation is a little bit tricksy, but with a bit of practice, it's not too bad. Like any notation system, writing it down is far more difficult. And that's a really good example, because trying to sort out whether the dancer is making their beat in B or A, for example, can be quite difficult if they're dancing quickly and they can't slow it down for you. And if they do slow it down, they'll do it differently. It can be really quite tricksy. So to start off with, if you're going to use a notation system, it's a really good idea to get some experience of reading notation and trying to dance the steps from a notation as you read it slowly before you start the more difficult business of actually writing down what people are doing. Now, the next movement I want to show you is, of course, the shuffle, which is, I suppose, the most prolific movement. And again, we've instead of writing that in terms of taps and catch-ins and so forth, we've compromised and given you that movement word shuffle, and that implies that I'm making 2 beats with my free foot. So I'm standing here flat left and I'm making 2 beats, and here in this case both the beats are in C straight actually, or I could do C turned out, or if I wanted to I could maybe go E turned out, C straight, E turned out, big round shuffles. So I can use that combination of modifiers in the right hand column to describe exactly where the shuffle takes place, and that's a really good example of how one of the core principles of Newcastle Notation is positional. It's the movement and where you perform it. So it's worth standing and thinking, let's do a few shuffles, and then what positions am I doing those in? You know, am I shuffling in B? Perfectly good. Or perhaps I'm shuffling in C. Or maybe I'm shuffling in C turned out, C straight. Or C turned out, C natural. Much more common. And you can see, because the map on the ground is smaller, the boxes are smaller, the closer you get to the supporting foot, the more accurately you can notate what you're doing. and that's particularly important with shuffles. There are two other combination movements that I want to deal with before we finish. The first is the lazy shuffle. A movement you've all done, and that of course is a tap followed by a step, or a tap followed by a spring, very often a spring. And you'll see in the when we've described shuffle that we put the word shuffle in the movement column, and of course the modifiers on the right hand column telling us where we're doing it, and we put two round brackets next to the shuffle to denote that it always takes 2 beats. And I'm always going to have to write 2 beats because there are 2 noises. So shuffle is always going to take 2 beats. If you look at 7/6/4, which follows on from the shuffle, you'll see that we do the same with a lazy shuffle. The lazy shuffle always takes 2 beats. The first one is always a tap. Conventionally we write it as tap. And the second movement is always a step or a spring. Very often it's a step. So here I'm doing tap in A, step in A, tap, step, tap, step, tap, step, tap, step, tap, step. And most commonly the foot starts just slightly behind where the tap's going to be made. You could write it as a catch out if you really wanted to, but we've simplified it for the notation because it's such a common movement. So the tap to start with usually starts from a position slightly to the rear of a supporting foot. So I'm doing lazy shuffles in A. If I wanted the tap to be further back, no problem. I can notate that, I can put where the modifier is for that lazy shuffle. And you'll see there are always two movements, tap step with the keyword lazy next to it, and the 2 modifiers in the modifier column telling me where I'm doing it. Flops are a little bit tricksy, tap dancey sort of thing, and the really only real difference is that the position of the leg when you finish the flop is in a rather unnatural place. Lazy shuffles, here I go, I'm doing lazy shuffles in A, and now I'm doing flops in A. And you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm extending my knee backwards to lock against, I can't push it any further backwards, and that turns a lazy shuffle into a flop. It just looks different. And because Sam Sherry, who we collected a lot of steps from, is a very keen exponent of flops, not the only one by any means, we have made that difference in the notation. Now, there's another movement which is important in a lot of clog dances, and it's another one of those things where people have got a wide range of names for the movement. Some people call it swanny, roll, all sorts of things, and we have used the word swivel as our standard word. And what that means is that I am moving my foot, rotating it on some part of the foot. This will be a heel swivel, that will be a toe swivel. So I've got on the ball of my foot, it would just be a swivel. If I'm up, it's a toe swivel, ball, swivel, heel, swivel. So I'm using those parts of the foot that we mentioned very early on to describe a part of my foot which is actually in contact with the ground. And all the swivel is a swinging movement. It might be in, it might be out, either way. And the modifiers tell me where I start and where I finish. So if my swivel is going heel swivel, and it's going to be in C straight, then it's going to end C turned out. Or it's going to be E turned out, E natural. So I can use that modifier column to describe where the beginning and the end points of the swivel are going to be. Now, occasionally in clog dance steps, you get this sort of movement where the swivel comes back. And in that case, you'll see there are three modifiers. It would be C straight, C turned out, C straight. and the system operates very simply. If you've got 2 modifiers in the modifier column, you know where your foot ends up. If you've got 3, it's got to come back. So it's a really straightforward way of doing things. And of course, don't forget that it can be a toe. And so a classic Swanee movement might be step left, heel, swivel, and now I'm taking weight on it, so it's underlined, step left. Now I put my toe down, I'm doing a ball swivel, and I'm taking weight. If it's weight, it's underlined. If it's weighted, if it's not weighted, and I'm just going, then that swivel has no underlining. So it really does flag up the importance of using that underlining to denote weight bearing, because, as I've said earlier on, there are a number of movements that sometimes can be weight bearing and sometimes are not. And if you don't underline it, it means it's not weight bearing. So it's really important to get that right. It's so important in using the word steps and spring. It's very useful for a lot of purposes, but it's not vital. But if you don't get it right for these movements, which can be weight bearing and sometimes are not, then you're in trouble. Okay. Let's just move on to talk about very briefly the business of clocking one foot against the other. Now, I wasn't going to go do this, but I'm getting the feeling from behind the camera that you're getting this. So everybody in front of me is nodding away. They're obviously understanding it, so I'm hoping that you are. Now, when one foot knocks against the other, and this is not going to be so good in a pair of step shoes, this is one of the things that we changed in 1995, or one of the things we modified in 1995, just to make it a bit easier to read. And what we assume is that where the right foot is striking against the left foot, that it is the left-hand side of the left foot that does the striking. So and the word we use is click. And so here I am, I'm going click. That's a click with the right foot moving, hitting my left foot. If I want the other side of my foot to do the clicking, I use the word reverse click, which is shortened to rev click in the movement column. So this is a click, and this is a rev click. Click, rev click, click, rev click. Okay, and we found that was much easier to understand than rather complicated side left, side rights, which you will find in the original notation. The original notation is fine, it works perfectly well, you can write it like that, but you will find, I am sure, using click and rev click to be much, much easier. And of course it doesn't have to be, here I'm using the side of my shoe, probably about ball left, and doing the click. It can be the toe, or it could be the heel. I could even use the tip. If I move sideways, I could even use the tip of my shoe to hit the heel. So I've got quite a multitude of things I can do in order to show in the notation that I'm clicking one foot against the other. And there's quite a clever modification, but let's just do this first. So if I'm doing, say, a well-known step, say kicks, which is a reasonably well-known Northumberland Durham step, I'm stepping left in A, I'm clicking my right foot against the left foot, and that's roughly in, it's roughly in rear B, so that will do. Okay, step, click. I'm stepping behind, and that's in RXC. I'm stepping in A, my left foot, rev click, roughly in RB, and I'm doing a heel drop on my left foot. So I'm going step, click, step, step, click, heel drop. And it's the important thing to watch out is not the heel drop, but the clicks. So it's click, step, step, rev click. Okay, and it works just the way for the other foot, of course. That's still a click because my left foot's moving. Still a click, steps behind, and does a rev click as it comes back. Now, that's rather quick, but there are ways in which you can use that system to write clicks when your feet are in the air. You can read about that in my notation system. But there's one absolutely final thing that I want to deal with, and it's in two parts. And this deals with steps that move. And the system, quite honestly, doesn't deal with these terribly cleverly, because a lot of clog steps are just on the spot, and clog steps that move are in a considerable minority. So the system doesn't cope brilliantly with these. And by far the best way of notating steps that move is to put a note underneath describing what happens. So, for example, if I do this, I could notate all those shuffles in different places as I go round. Pointless, absolutely pointless. What I do is I write in the notes underneath, as a dancer performs this step, they do a complete revolution in a clockwise direction to face front on beat 6, whatever it is. It's much easier to describe than to actually write it down. So that's the first thing. Keep it simple. If you can describe the step in terms of a sentence or a paragraph in the notes, that's the thing to do. Don't worry too much about the actual movement that somebody is performing. But if you must, and in some steps of course you must, deal with the actual movement, the principle is this. You'll remember that I said that the centre of gravity, the centre of the maps, is the same place. It's that cross between my feet, between the insteps for one and my feet for the other quadrant line. And what I'm recording when I'm moving is that centre of gravity, that cross, that's what's moving. So the map is moving. Okay, so if I step forward to here, I'm in CC. Now I want to move the map for some reason. I'm going to dance for a bit in this position. Okay, so I start off, perhaps I'll come back a bit because I know the cameras will be easy to see it. I start off with my feet in RC, RC. And I'm going to step forwards now into B. And I'm going to dance there for a bit. And then I'm going to step back. So, how do I do that? Well, I want to move these quadrants. So, here I am. I'm going to start my step this time in A. And I'm going to move the quadrants forwards. So let's imagine that this is position A. Okay, so the cross is there. This is position A. I'm going to move forwards to C and to C. Now, because I'm now going to dance for a bit in that position, I want to move the map. How do I do that? I put an asterisk next to the C's in the modifier column. And that tells me that the map has followed my feet. So if I step into E and put an asterisk next to them, the whole map has moved and the cross between the quadrants is now back to between my feet. So what I'm doing in order to facilitate writing movements is to show that the quadrants, the maps, are moving. Okay, and one asterisk shows that the map is just moving forwards, sideways, but it's staying as a square. If I want to record turning, I put two asterisks. So here I am, let's start back here. Here I am in, let's say, my A position. Let's pretend this is A. Now, I'm going to step in F, F here, and E, no, let's say B, XB. Okay, here I am, I'm going to step in, no, sorry, it's E, isn't it? That's roughly E. E and XC. Now I've turned, so if I want these quadrants to line up between my feet and I want to retain that turn, I've got to move them through an angle, in this case about 45 degrees. And I write that with 2 asterisks. So if the map moves in this perpendicular fashion, it's 1 asterisk. If the map moves and it turns, it's 2 asterisks. Now, that's actually quite tricky to grip, but it is worth just thinking about it and having a look in the notations, because you will find occasionally that it is necessary to write notations or read notations where the step does actually move. But I have to say 80% of the time you don't need to do that. You can describe whatever the person is doing by putting a line in, a sentence or a paragraph. That's a much, much simpler way of doing it, and you really only have to resort to moving the quadrants around, moving the map around in extremis. You've got to be a bit stuck before you have to do that, but it does happen. Okay, I haven't been able to describe everything in Newcastle Notation. There are all sorts of extra complications that occur, like pickups and wings, and I haven't gone into toe-heel movements very much either, but they are all explained in the booklet. If you have any questions, you can email InStep, and we'll do our little best to answer them. If you want to try out any of these notations, there are a huge number on the InStep website where you can find the notations, you can try and run through them and see how you get on. And a final piece of advice is, well, final 2 pieces of advice. Firstly, it's a good idea to try finding notations where you already know the dance pretty well, and then you can compare what the notator has got with your dancing. That way it's rather like reading music. You play a tune, you read the music. If it's a tune you know, it's going to be much easier to learn to read the music than a tune you don't know. And the second thing is, don't give up. It's a really good system. It's used by many, many dance notators, and over a period of time there have been literally hundreds and hundreds of steps notated in Newcastle Notation. So it's become a pretty standard way of writing down English and Scottish clogs and clog dances and step dances. So don't give up, persevere away. It's not as difficult as it sounds. Thank you very much.